Hello and welcome to the Solo Dance Modified IJS official webinar. This webinar is mainly for those who do not have an IJS background. If you have a competition appointment in any discipline, this webinar is not required and the quiz is not required. The quiz is only required for those who are test judges and have yet to use the IJS system. However, if you are already a competition official, you're welcome to watch the webinar and certainly welcome to take the quiz as well. The quiz is already available to take. You will find all of the answers in the officials manual that is available on US Figure Skating's website. If you go under programs and you scroll down to solo series and click on that, you'll see a list of links that will take you to a number of different documents, and the officials manual is in there. So let's get started. The agenda for tonight, we're going to talk about things to keep in mind this season. Then we're going to talk about what you're authorized to officiate at your levels. We'll talk about your responsibilities as a judge. We'll show you some examples of judges' worksheets and the screens that you'll be using. And we'll specifically talk about judging pattern dance and then the grades of execution for short dance and free dance. And we'll go into component marking followed by deductions that are voted on by the judges panel. And then we'll talk about the specific process for taking the deductions. We'll try to do a question and answer session for each element and then one at the very end. And if you see something that's underlined, it probably just means it's a new rule for this year. So things to keep in mind this season. This is the start of a 2-year trial and it will not be perfect for sure. So we ask you to be patient. We've worked hard to get this up and running, but mistakes will happen. We don't want you to get too frustrated with the process or with yourselves. We understand that these are new rules. There's a huge learning curve trying to go from 6.0 to IJS, and we don't expect you to have a full comfort level at the beginning. Be prepared for frustrated and or confused skaters and coaches. They'll have questions as well as we go along this season. Only the controller referee should be addressing issues with coaches, skaters, or parents. So judges, please refer all questions and concerns to your CR. We don't want you to have to answer to any of the skaters or coaches, and especially parents. This year, program content sheets will be mandatory. These will help the judging process considerably. The CR will alert you to any changes to the elements after the program. So if they said their first element is an edge element and it turns out to be a spin, you'll either see spin pop up on your screen, or if you're using the paper system, controller referee will come over and explain to you that the first element was a spin. So we all are judging the same elements. When in doubt, look to the manuals and don't be afraid to ask. You're certainly willing, you're able to print off as much of the material as you feel is helpful and bring that out to the stands with you. And don't be afraid to ask. You'll be on panels with a variety of people, some who have had a great deal of experience and some who are new to this. I think it helps to talk to people and see what how they approach IJS. Something to know is that field of play calls cannot be challenged, but computer errors may, and no one is allowed to protest a judge's marks. What field of play call means is that anything that happens while the skater is on the ice, a judgment by the tech panel or the officials, that's field of play, and that cannot be challenged. So if the tech panel says that an edge element was a no value and they had their reasons, that cannot be protested. If you as an official decide that you want to give something a -2 GOE, nobody can question you and nobody can challenge that mark. For officials authorization, I'm not going to read through all of this. It's in the manuals, but again, it's here as a reference. So if you're a bronze dance test or higher, you can see what you're able to judge. The same if you're a silver test or higher, or a non-qual competition or higher. So these few pages here just outline what you're authorized to judge. And there's nothing wrong with letting your referee know, if even though you're maybe qualified to judge all the combined events and you're not quite sure you want to take on short dance, let your referee know. If you're a novice sectional competition or higher, pretty much you can judge all the events, but it also makes you eligible to serve on the tech panel. So you could be a controller referee or a technical specialist. You do not have to have a technical specialist certification to be on a tech panel for solo dance. And then the non-qualifying and higher dance technical controllers and specialists may also serve. If you do fall into this category and you think that you would like to serve on the tech panel this year, you do need to take the quiz and watch the webinar for the solo dance technical panel. That will be held this coming Wednesday. For you who are watching this later, it'll be in the past, but it'll all be posted on the website, and you'll be able to access that. And you can take the quiz at any time. You just need to take it prior to when your first event is going to be. Judges' responsibilities. Award a grade of execution to each element. So as each element is skated, the technical panel is going to identify it. They'll give it a level, and it's going to pop up on your screen, or it'll already be on your worksheet in front of you. You're just going to give it a GOE, and we'll go over how to do that in a little bit. The next thing you need to do is you have to assign 3 program component scores for each performance. This is very similar to your second mark in 6.0. Then identify and take appropriate deductions for violations of choreography, music, or costume rules. We're going to get into detail about deductions at the end of this webinar. There's also a technical judge, and that only means that this person will time the program length for the controller referee. And what that means is you'll have a stopwatch, and when the skater first starts to move, you start the stopwatch, and then you're going to judge like always. You're going to put in your GOEs, you're going to put in your components, but when they stop, you push the stopwatch again, so you're timing that skating time. And if that time on your stopwatch goes over the allotted time, you need to inform the controller referee so they can take the appropriate deduction. Judges worksheet and IJS screens. So plan program sheets, like I mentioned, are required. I'm not 100% sure how we're going to make this mandatory. Obviously we can't withdraw them, but we will do our best to make sure that there's some way we are getting the plan program content sheets. And the controller referee certainly has the ability to go around and find a skater and have them fill it out if it has not been done so by the registration. What they'll do is they will have a place for their short dance and a place for their free dance to write in the codes of the elements in the order it's skated. That information is then transferred to your worksheet. This is what you would have out with you on the stand. It is possible that it may look a little different because some accountants may want to save paper and they're able to put up to 3 skaters on one sheet of paper, so it's kind of all condensed and it would go the other width-wise. But in general, you're going to have a place for your elements. You'll see what they're planned, what they have planned. So if you look up under planned element, you see element number 1 says 1 RH. That stands for 1 rumba. You'll have different codes for short dance, but that's where you're going to have your first element. You'll have an area for writing comments, and then on the far side, you'll see where your GOE is. Everyone has their own kind of shorthand. This is where it comes in handy when you only have a small area to write in. For example, if you look at element 2, which is the no-touch circular step sequence for this couple, off to the left I have SEP for separation, which means there was a choreographic restriction between elements 1 and 2. and the two lines means that they were skating far apart. I have the words "bobble by the man," so I'm at a -1. And on the right are the program components. We will only have 3, and we'll go over those in a little bit. At the bottom of the page, you're going to see it says costume, prop violation, music requirements violation, and violation for choreography restrictions. If we were using a paper system, you would put a big X there, and when you turn that into the accountants, they know that you want to take that specific deduction. Screens for the GOEs. To start with, we will not have replay. You will not have video, so you won't have this big picture of a skater there. But you will see on the left, and it's blurry here, but on the left you'll see the codes, and it should match what's on your worksheet. It'll be blank when they start, and every time they do an element, the tech panel is going to call it, and it's going to pop up in that box on the left, and you're going to assign it a GOE by pressing one of the numbers at the bottom of the screen. The red are the negatives, the base mark is yellow, and the positives are in green. When the program is over, you're going to do components, and we'll take a look at the component screen in a minute. At the very bottom of the screen, you'll see that those are the 5 components. There will just be 3 for us. You would hit the component, it would take you to a different screen. This next shot is a picture of the GOE main screen. Obviously, they have replay, which we won't. I included this screen because you'll see on the left under elements there's a little red box, and that means that that element is under review. We've had that for a long time where the box gets either highlighted or it's red or there's some little note. We know that the tech panel is reviewing it. We really don't need to pay attention to it. That's their issue. The only thing there really isn't, you're not going to see a symbol for, you know, a called edge on a jump or a cheated jump. So that really doesn't affect us too much. And I do know that at the ISU level, they were trying to remove that so it wasn't distracting the judges. So it is possible that you will not see a red box if something gets reviewed. A component screen. Once you click on the component in the bottom, this pops up. Again, we'll be using smaller screens, so you probably won't have all the verbiage at the top, but you will have your numbers. So you'll have 0 through 10 in the bottom row, and then in the upper right, well, in the middle, those gray numbers in the right-hand corner, which you can't see real well, that's 0.25, 0.5, and 0.75. So you could put in, as they're doing here, they've hit 6, and then they go up and they hit the 0.5, and you have a 6.5. If you want to change the number, you just write over. You would just go and say, oh, I meant to do a 4.5, and you would just go back and hit the 4, but you have to hit the 0.5 again. And then you go on to your next component, and you can kind of switch back and forth. You see that this person here is using their eraser to touch the screen. Some of the new screens are touch with your finger. Some need an eraser, so you need to kind of experiment. The last thing I'll say about the screens is that they are available to look at if you've never used one before. Ask an accountant to take you down, or a referee, or just another judge who's familiar with the screens, and go down when there's a break in between events and play around with the screens and get familiar with it. Learn where the deduction button is. That's a whole nother screen. And again, don't be afraid to ask if you have questions about how to use the equipment. Judging pattern dance. I'll quickly go through. Right now, if you're judging pattern dance under 6.0, the judge observes and evaluates the following. So we're looking at accuracy, placement, skating skills, style, unison, timing, expression, and all of these things get lumped into 2 marks in the old 6.0. Well, we're really not changing what we're looking for. We're using the same kind of criteria. We're just kind of assigning it different places, different scores, if you will. So when we talk about accuracy or placement and edge quality of the pattern dance, in the IJS system, that's going to be part of your grade of execution. So when the skater comes out, let's say they're doing a willow waltz and they do their first sequence, you're going to see willow waltz 1 pop up on your screen, And it's going to ask you, they're looking for a grade of execution. That's the -3 through +3 scale. So it's up to you to assign it one of those numbers based on what you thought of the accuracy of the steps. Were the steps correct? Was the placement of the pattern correct? And what was the edge quality? If it had great edge quality, you would be going up into the positives. Maybe the steps were correct, but the edge quality was poor or shaky, so you might be at a 0 or go down into the minuses. When we look at the component scores, that's where we look at skating skills, execution, performance and carriage, and interpretation and timing. Those are the 3 component scores, and you're going to be looking at other qualities of the skating to assess in these 3 scores. We have a chart here, and again, this is all in the officials manual for your reference, so this is a helpful sheet to kind of give you an idea of what we feel is a base mark, and a base mark is that yellow 0 that you would press. And base is acceptable, kind of, it's kind of average. It's not bad. It's not perfect. It doesn't mean that you can't have a couple flats, or the edge quality doesn't need to be great. The pattern can be a little off to be a 0. But clearly you can't really have any really major mistakes. It says right there, under base, no major errors. And then you kind of work up and down from there. So if you're looking at, this Willow Waltz that's just gone by, and, it's just amazing edges and all the steps are correct, and, the pattern is dead on, you can look at, okay, maybe I'm in the very good to, outstanding range. So, but if you notice that there's a bad mohawk and wide stepping and the edges aren't great and a lot of flats, now we're looking at, okay, this is pretty poor, and we probably at a -2 or somewhere in there. Then we have adjustments to the GOEs depending on particular things that could happen. So the first one is if it's not started on the prescribed beat. And if this happens, we reduce by 1 grade for the first performed sequence or section, and I'll discuss the difference between sequence and sections a little bit later. But if they do start on the wrong beat, you want to reflect that in the first sequence, the first GOE that you assign. Then we go down to, you look if they're not holding edges or steps for the required number of beats. From 1 edge or step up to 10% of the steps, you can go no higher than a +1. So it kind of forces your mark. You think it's really great, but they were holding steps for the wrong number of beats. 10% of the steps, you can't give it a +2. And then you look at, like, for 10% to 25% or 25% or more. I'll give you an example. If we looked at a rumba, if a couple rushed step 5, which is that 4-beat edge, and only held it for 3 beats, and then they sat on both their Choctaws for extra time just so that they could, kind of get a good clean edge, or they're just not ready to step, and then they maybe either rush through the 3-turn or through the change of edge real quickly. We have 4 steps that have not been held for the correct number of beats that's required in the rules. We look at this chart and say we cannot go higher than a -1. So regardless of all the other things that we saw in our marking chart, maybe the edges were really good, but they were good because they sat on the edge for 6 beats instead of 4 for the Choctaws. And maybe the curves were good and the correct pattern was 90%. You might be thinking it's in the pluses, but if we look at these adjustments, because they did not have the right required number of beats for 4 steps, which is 25% of that dance, we can't go higher than a -1, so we're forced into that. If there's a loss of balance within the element, it's reduced by 1 grade. So maybe we thought it was a really, really nice dance and we're at a +2, but there was a slight little wobble in a corner, we'd bring it down to a +1. If there's a stumble, you can't go higher than a 0. So again, if it's really nice and you're at a +2 and there's a stumble, even if it's a little one, you're stuck with a 0. And if it's a fall, you can't go any higher than a -2. So pattern dance sections. For most of the dances that you'll be seeing, it's going to be 1 GOE per sequence. And we use the word sequence now instead of pattern. That happened a number of years ago. Obviously, we kind of switch back and forth because a lot of us are used to using the word pattern. But sequence is really the word for one pattern of a dance. The exception is if you have a big dance like, great example is the Argentine Tango, a lot of steps, it covers the full rink. It's going to be broken up into what they call sections. So sequence 1, which is one pattern, will have a section 1 and a section 2. So when you start the Argentine Tango, you start from step 1, you go all the way down into the end pattern, right before the big swing roll on the end. That's where, in that corner, is where section 2 starts. So when section 1 is done, they get to that corner, you're going to see sequence 1, section 1 pop up on your screen. And that means that you need to give that portion of the dance a GOE. And then you're going to start watching the continuation of the rest of the sequence. All of that will be section 2 of the Argentine. And that will pop up when they finish, and you'll put a GOE in for that. In the end, by the time they do 2 sequences, you'll have 4 GOEs, one for each sequence of each, one for each section of each sequence. Sounds probably more confusing than it is. I think when you see it on the screen or you see it on your worksheet, it's going to make a lot more sense. So we're going to try to watch videos. The videos aren't great quality after they come through in a webinar. But what we're going to look for, this is a pattern dance. We're going to kind of come up with a GOE here, and I've written it up at the top as well. So we'll talk through it a little bit. Here we go, the volume. So for the most part, you're going to see that the steps are correct. These are the right steps, the right place in the pattern, but fairly shallow. And some of them really aren't on the right edges all the time. Kind of up on the toe after that Choctaw. Not really doing a rocker there. So we're finding mistakes, and whoops, we have got a stumble. So with those two, with the quality of the dance and a stumble, we know we're probably at least a -2. Now we're looking at the second sequence of the dance. And it's pretty much the same as the first. But by the time we get to the end, it's really the same without the stumble, so we're at a -1. Now the Yankee Polka is an example of a dance that could be broken up into sections. I didn't want to do it that way because it might be too confusing. I just figured it'd be easier just to watch one full sequence or pattern and assign a GOE to it. This is the next example. And the biggest thing here is watch for the edge quality in this dance. For a solo Yankee Polka, this is really exceptional. These edges in here, that's really outstanding. Also look at the rate of speed she travels on the ice. The flow and speed is very good. Timing is great. Actually does a rocker. So this for me would be a +2. So that's kind of how that works. So do some question and answers here. First question is, will the GOEs stay -3 to +3 or go to -5 to +5? The ISU is proposing to change to a -5 plus 5 system. That would take effect in July 1, but our season will have already started, so we're hoping that we can stay with the -3 plus 3 for the remainder of the season. We're working with accounting now to make sure that we can do that. Obviously, if there's a change, we'll tell you, but I'm fairly certain that we will be -3 plus 3 for the entire season, but probably we'll have to switch to the -5 plus 5 next year. The next question, does the technical judge time lifts as well? No. The only thing the technical judge is going to time is the program length time, when the skater starts to move and when the skater finishes. Why does the base value of a GOE allow for flats? Kind of went over that a little bit in terms of it doesn't have to be perfect. So kind of look at the big picture if there are a couple flats, but there's one area that's really well done, or maybe the hard parts, the harder steps, they've got good edge quality, but they kind of hit a couple flats here and there. It kind of evens out, so you can absolutely be at a base with a couple flats here and there. Will we have a chance to look at the screens? Yes. If you signed in after I mentioned that, definitely you'll have an opportunity to look at the screens, and I suggest you do that before every, each time you get a different system. Is there a bullet point list for GOEs like in singles? No, we are not using that system. Dance has never done that, but when they go to -5 plus 5, this year, if it passes it at the ISU Congress, they will be using a bullet point system. So my guess is that solo dance would adopt a bullet point system next season, but not this season. Will the mini system be the same as singles and pairs? Yes, it's essentially the same. So if you've ever done IJS in singles and pairs, you have IJS experience, you're really not going to have a difficult time. So you're going to have an easy time switching over. Okay, let's move on to grades of execution for short dance and free dance. So again, we're talking about the GOEs per element. This marking guide is for adjustments. So we talked about adjustments for pattern dance earlier. There were only a few here and there. There's a lot more that we can do for elements. So this is an entire chart. You'll notice that it actually includes the pattern dance elements at the top. So if you just have this one worksheet, it's good for everything that you do. You'll see right in there, it talks about the not holding the edges and steps for required beats. That's what we just talked about. So pattern dance you've got. Adjustments applicable to all required elements except for pattern dance. So this means whether you're looking at an edge element, a spin, a step sequence, a dance stop, these aspects are things that you want to look for in those elements. So poses or moves awkward or not aesthetically pleasing. Sometimes skaters can hit a kind of really awkward pose in an edge element, and you just find it doesn't work with the music, and it's really almost kind of inappropriate. You absolutely can reduce by 1. This chart somehow is missing the reduce by -1, but if you look in the official's manual, it is correct. So I started with that because it's the first one, and it's missing its adjustment. If the element does not fit or is not skated to the rhythm or the phrasing of the music, you're not supposed to go higher than a -1. This is critical because ice dance is all about the music. If somebody is doing an edge element that doesn't make any sense to the music and they start in the middle of a phrase, you absolutely can give it a -1, and you're supposed to. Body lines and poses, beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. So this is sort of the opposite of the first one. Maybe you think it's absolutely beautiful and it's just an incredible pose or position and a spin. Notice that we have the third column that says increase by. So we're not always looking for the negatives. We want to look for the positives just as much. So other ways to go up in a GOE, maybe the entry or exit is unexpected or creative. If somebody does like a big jump into a twizzle sequence, you could use that as a creative entrance, and you could go up a grade. If the element is creative and enhances the choreography or and the character of the chosen dance, that's you want to go up. So sometimes if you look at a twizzle, they're really kind of hard to stylize, but sometimes you might see somebody hit a position with their arms. That's if they're doing a Spanish dance and they hit, a very traditional Spanish arm position during the twizzles, and then they have 3 steps in between during the free dance. They might do a couple steps that are, reflect the character, and then they do the second twizzle and they find another position that really sort of shows you that it's sort of a Latin dance. You really should go up on that. I mean, that's really hard to do. It's easier in a spin, but you still, if it really is in the character of the dance, we want to reward, so we want to go up. So even if maybe there's a slight little bit of traveling on the spin, but it was great to the music, had a really interesting entry, and the position was beautiful, you can absolutely be in the pluses, even though the spin might have traveled a little bit. Look for if it's skated to the phrasing of the rhythm. Again, if it's not skated to the rhythm or phrasing, we go down. But if it is and it's done really well, we go up. And speed across the ice as well. That's also something important. So these are obviously things that we're looking for in every element. In the edge element, additionally, if it does not reflect the character of the music, you can't go higher than a -1. This is hard sometimes because it's a little subjective, but I think sometimes you really will notice it when someone hits a pose and you're like, that doesn't make any sense to a waltz. Sometimes maybe they'll go down into a hydroplane and it's this beautiful waltzy sweeping music. That doesn't make sense. That might be a -1. Solo twizzles, adjustments, other than what's under the ones that are applicable to all elements. We also have, if the execution of turns are incorrect, like 3 turns, we call that a check turn. Pirouettes, which is sort of where they stall out and they stop moving across the ice, we call that a pirouette or a spin. If they're scraped or skidded badly. So if one twizzle is incorrect, you cannot go higher than a 0, and that's really important to remember. If 2 twizzles are incorrect, you can't go higher than a -1. If the exit of the first 2 twizzles, with smooth and running edge. Okay, so this is one of those positives that we look for. And then we definitely want to reward and go up. Step sequence adjustments. Again, we talk about skating in character. If the pattern or placement is incorrect or incomplete, not recognizable, we go down a grade. So if it's a circular step and it doesn't close, we would reduce by a grade. If it's an inclusion of a not permitted element, and there are lists of not permitted elements under the requirement sheets for each level. For instance, if they did like a big jump, a jump inside their step sequence, you'd have to go down by 2 grades. Lack of flow and movement across the ice and steps. This is important because you will have skaters that will do this. They just kind of step instead of skate. And if it really is a lack of edge work and they're just kind of stepping rather than pushing and using edges and having good run of edge and good flow and speed across the ice, you need to be -1 or lower. If it's a free dance that requires 2 step sequences, if the second one is obviously skated at a different tempo than the first one, you can go up a grade. So if the first one is done to a very, very slow waltz piece, and the second one is done in a really, really fast polka style, and they're skating the steps to the beat correctly, sometimes you could have a polka playing, but they're still doing slow steps. They need to be skating on the beat correctly to get this increase, but look for that. And then creative use of variety of steps and movements. So look for creativity and increase. Go up in your GOE. Loss of balance, stumbles and falls within an element. If it's a loss of balance, we go down by 1. If it's a stumble, no higher than 0. If it's a fall, no higher than -2, similar to the pattern dance that we talked about. So short and free dance grades of execution. We talked about the criteria for pattern dance elements already. So I'm just going to kind of go to the second line and look at edge elements. In general, we're looking for the phases of the edge element. How good is the entry, how good is the exit, and the stability in between. So here's some buzzwords that you can kind of look at and say, okay, to get a bass, you know, the entry and exit should be short or solid, and the edge element should be stable throughout. And then you can kind of go up or down, you know, as you use this chart to get a feel for sort of where your bass mark is. And then remembering that chart that we just looked at, you know, if everything is a 0 here, but they did it really well, that fit the phrasing and the rhythm, and it reflected the character, we can go up a grade. So it's possible to kind of be at a 0 here, but through this guide, we find ways to bring it up to maybe a +1 or +2. Let's look at some edge elements. So look for this. To me, it's done in the character of the dance, right on the music. Hand movements kind of fit. However, not a lot of speed or flow, which we talked about as one of the things we look for to possibly go up. So it's kind of hard to reward for that because it's not moving. It's on the correct edge, but it's not real deep. So I would be at a 0, maybe a +1 because you felt it was really in character and it was done well to the phrasing. So I think you could absolutely give this a 1. And if it was a 0, no one's going to argue with that either. Again, as I mentioned, 0 is bass, and that's not a bad mark. And it's also important to remember that everyone doesn't have to give the same GOE. It's great when it happens, but again, there's so many different aspects to the criteria, and you might weigh something a little heavier than someone else. So as long as you're in a similar range, if everybody is at a 0 to a +1 and maybe there's a +2 in there somewhere, that's a pretty good sheet. If you had a -3 to a +3 for this one element, then we got a problem. And that's something you might talk about as a panel afterwards. If you see big variations in one element, talk it out and see what everyone else was seeing. Maybe you missed a touchdown that you were writing or something, or putting a mark in the screen. There was a little touchdown in the spin, you didn't see it. That can happen. So definitely ask if you think your GOE is off from everyone else's. This one, my comments here were great speed. Listen, watch the phrasing of this. Look where she starts it with the music. Edge is amazing. Beautiful position. This is +2. It hits so many of those little check marks on that marking guide. It was done in character, the music. The phrasing was beautiful. She had flow and speed, and she had edge. So, you could be at a 2. You could make a good argument that it's a +3. So she does this to the music pretty well. Kind of flat. Oh, and now she's on a different edge. So there's a couple things here. This year, if you do not hold the edges long enough, it is not up to the judges to time it. The technical panel will be doing that. So she was not in one position for 3 seconds on either lobe. So a 2-lobe edge element is what we call a combination element. We don't call it a long edge element anymore. We call it a combination. And what you'll see on your screen or your worksheet is edge element plus edge element. And that means it's a combination. And so you're kind of marking where they're going to be called separately. If she had held the first one for 3 seconds and the second one for 2, she would have had an edge element level 1 plus edge element no value combination. But you don't have to worry about that. You're just doing how well it was done. Well, obviously she didn't hold the edges long enough. they weren't even deep. So even though we don't have to worry about timing, we do have to worry about the edge quality, and they were clearly fairly flat. So for me, the overall quality of this would be in the minus range, really because of the edge quality, and she's just not holding it. But this year, if that was called a no value, it doesn't matter what you put in for GOE because it will not appear on the protocol. Because it has 0 points, we actually don't take into consideration what the judges panel thought of it, because it doesn't matter at that point anymore. Here's a combination. So here's one edge element, followed by a second edge element. Both are held well, positions are decent. It's done pretty good to the phrasing. I wouldn't say it's the perfect phrasing, but it's fine. Again, this would be a 0 to +1 range. You could argue either mark very easily. So now move on to twizzles. So the solo twizzle is great of execution. So this is kind of that base chart that we were talking about a minute ago with the edge elements. Here again, we're looking at the phases of the element, the entry and the exit, the turns, and the connecting steps in between the two twizzles is also important. So to kind of come up with sort of our base mark, we look at, if we're looking for base, was it sure and stable, both the entry and the exit? Were the turns continuous and stable? And were the connecting steps sure and clean? And then you can kind of either go up or down from that. If we found one that we thought was, yeah, it meets all the criteria for a 0, but man, was it done well to the phrasing of the music. And they were so in character, the way they held their hands and the steps in between. What do we do for that? We reward in the GOE. So we've said, well, we met all the criteria for 0, but she also did these 2 other things. You could potentially be at a +2. A lot of times you'll find that the skaters who know how to really work the phrasing and the interpretation and the character are also going to be the better skaters. So you're probably going to be in the +2 range anyway. Let's look at this set of twizzles. So there's no major errors you'll see. She does a jump entry, which we can go up for. Jump. First set of twizzles, pretty decent, continuous. Second, the twizzles are fine. I didn't love the position in the second one, but it was okay. So for me, I'm going to go up for the jump. Might kind of go down for the position, not aesthetically pleasing, not a great position in the second set. So we're probably at a 0 to a +1 again, because you can find some good things and you can find some things that weren't as great. Let's watch the quality of her. Oh, we do not have this video. Apologize. I don't know what happened here, but this video is not going to work. So I don't know what happened there. So hang in there for 1 second. I want to show you this set of twizzles. So we're going to go out and find the video, and I apologize for this, but I think it's really important to watch. So I want you to watch the quality of her turns. All right, that didn't help. Let's watch again. So stops up on her toe, and then kind of up on her toe again there. So we have errors in the twizzle itself. And if you remember that chart, that deduction marking guide sheet that you're always going to want to have with you in the stands, if you refer to that chart and you see that she had errors, you definitely can't go higher than a 0 for that first set because she has an error on 1 twizzle. Some of you might think she had an error on the second one. Some of you might be more forgiving. So if you thought there was an error on the second one, you have to go down to -1. I definitely feel when she goes up on her toe on the first one, that's clearly an error. The second one, I would hear both sides of that. Uh, Hoping this plays. There's nothing real special about this. Again, it's hard to interpret Latin or any rhythm in a twizzle sequence. So if it can be done, you want to go up. I didn't really see that here. The phrasing was not dead on, but there was sort of a circular feeling to that portion of the music. So you could say it was okay to the music. So this is just a bass. There was the entry and exit were sure. There was no errors in it, and the twizzle itself was fairly stable. Let's talk about step sequences. So again, we're looking sort of at that baseline of coming up with our sort of base mark for the step sequence. We're going to look at edges and the sureness of the steps, and we have some buzzwords across to sort of represent where you might have, your -3 to a +3. So if it's very flat and shaky, you're going to be down at a -3. If they're deep, quiet, beautiful, bold edges, and we're talking way up in the positives, so +3. We are going to watch speed and glide. Remember, in the marking guide, if it's just stepped and there's no real flow across the ice, definitely want to reduce. You really can't even go higher than a -1 if that's the case. And if you look at 0, it says some speed and some flow. So there really isn't any speed or flow. -1's the highest you can go. So that's sort of how we come up with that. Footwork and turns. So we're looking for, whether turns are on 2 feet, pushing, jumped, awkward, if they're wide, or one. That's the minus range. We look at nice, clean turns. Now we're in the plus range. So again, I'm hoping these all work. So this is her stop, dance stop, and she's about to do a midline step. So I feel like she's skating to the character of the music, but I'm seeing all I've seen is a lot of top. She tried to do a difficult turn there. It was not clean. That bracket didn't make a full 2. The twizzle was not a full 2 revolutions. She's got another one down here that doesn't do a full 2 revolutions. She comes out on the toe there. So both of her twizzles, she just does 1.5 turns, and she comes out on her toe. I apologize for that. Again, watch. A lot of hops and toe steps. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Let's get into it. See, bunny hops and just not a clean bracket. 1.5 turns up on the toe. That's nothing. These are, yeah. So for me, this is a great example of a -1, because even though she's skating in character to the music, to me, it's just hopping and stepping, and it's actually more of a free skating type step sequence for me than a dance type step sequence. When we watch the next examples, I think you're going to really see the difference. Why I would call this a free skating step sequence, and the others are a dance step sequence. So she's trying difficult turns. Look at her. She's laying on some of the edges. The cleans aren't necessarily turned, but she is using edge work. She's using recognizable difficult steps. Whether they get awarded or not is a different story. And it's and there's some flow and edge across the ice. So for me, this would be a 0. Maybe you could say a +1. I think a 0 is a good mark for this. And again, it's not all the turns are clean, but it doesn't have to be for a base mark. But at least that you were seeing an effort to do difficult turns and stay on edges and have some flow and speed. this is a great step sequence for me. And so I want you to just look at the difference between this and the first one. Oh, goodness. Phrasing perfectly in character. One foot section that had a rocker bracket Choctaw double twizzle. Nice counter. She's got a decent Choctaw. Perfectly done to the music. Right on the phrasing. Hits those little beats and accents. No little nuances. I think that's a great example of where you could go to a +2 because she had the speed and flow. She had good edge work, which we saw in that first chart. But we also saw really great attention to the phrasing and the character of the music. So I think it's really easy to go up for this skater. Spins and dance stops. These are choreographic elements, and we use this chart for both of these elements. So I'm not going to go over it because we've already talked about how we use these charts. So take some time to get used to, how we use this. And I apologize. Some of these, like the word choreography, the Y has been moved to the next line. But what I do want to say about the choreographic spin and dance stop is the purpose of these elements is to enhance the program. You need to ask yourself when the element is done, is the program better for having that element in it? Did it really make sense? Did it make sense to the character, to the placement, to the style, everything about it really should enhance the program. And if it's really original, really, interesting, reward. We'll take a look. You're going to see a lot of pluses with these spins because a lot of these girls have good spins. Makes sense to the music. Beautiful position, centers it well, entry and exit, right to the music. So it's easy to go way up on this mark. So this would be a +2. And you'll see some spins that are not so great, and you'll have a good chance to use your negative range too. We're going to move on to the stops. This stop you're going to see is really in the character of the music. I'm in the pluses for the GOE, but I want you to watch how long this stop is. Okay. So we're going to time it from when she, comes to complete stop. I'm up to 7, 8, 9, 10. So we're in the up to 8, 9 seconds for the stop, maybe longer. We judge stops the same way that they do in couples. So couples in the free dance, you're allowed to stop for up to 5 seconds, unlimited number of them. It's the same for solo dance, except we allow for 6 seconds. If the stop goes too long, then it's a choreographic deduction. So you can still give positive GOE, was great, did everything right. I'll give this a +1, maybe a +2. But later on, I'm going to go down and I'm going to hit the choreographic deduction button. And if the majority of the panel all took the deduction, it will get taken as a -1. So the first stop that's done is going to be your dance stop that gets a grade of execution. If she does another one later on, you can consider that as part of your interpretation mark, maybe. It won't get a GOE. It won't get called by the tech panel. They are allowed to do another one, but just make sure they don't go over 6 seconds on any of them. Now, you may see this year, you may not, but it's kind of hard to tell where she's actually stopping when she's skating. So this is she's stopped here, but now she's actually run of edge. She's really skating that on curves, and now she's stopped again, and that would have been appropriate, but now she's skating again. So for me, I don't have a stop for 3 seconds anywhere. Most likely the tech panel would call this no value if it doesn't hit 3 seconds, but just keep in mind, that if a stop doesn't hit 3 seconds, it will be no value. And again, if it's a no value element, your GOE is not going to matter. You can put in whatever you want. It'll never show up on the protocol. No one will know what you awarded it. My guess is that we won't see a lot of these, because once somebody gets a no value once and they say why, and it said you didn't stop for 3 seconds, they will stop for 3 seconds for the rest of the season. So we'll see fewer and fewer of these examples. So let's do another question and answer session. If edge element isn't held for 3 seconds, is it a deduction? No, because they will get a no value. So again, we don't have to worry about that as judges. The tech panel will handle the edge element timing. So just put down how well you think it was done. Put in a GOE. If it wasn't for 3 seconds, it's a no value. It won't matter what you did anyway. But you don't need to concern yourself with the timing. And it was pointed out, someone said, well, why do we time stops but not edge elements? Well, it's again, we're trying to mirror couples as much as we can. The edge elements take the place and have the same scale of values as a lift, and the referee times lifts and takes deductions for lifts. So that's the way it'll be handled in solo dance. Edge elements will be handled by the tech panel, and stops will be a choreographic restriction if they go over time. That's handled by the judges panel. Where do you find the officials' manuals and other materials? So what you're going to want to do, again, I mentioned this at the beginning. Go to US Figure Skating's website, go under Programs, under Solo Series, and then you're going to see a list of all the different reference materials, and your charts and worksheets will all be in there. At the charts in the webinar, in the manual, yes, I think I mentioned that. Everything will be in the manual or a standalone chart. Will everyone be required to fill out a plan program content sheet? Yes. Again, I'm not quite sure how we're going to enforce that, but that is supposed to be happening. How long do we have to take the quiz? You can take it anytime up to, make sure you take it probably a couple weeks before your first event. US Figure Skating will be tracking who has taken the quiz, so we can tell each LOC who has been certified to judge solo dance. So US Figure Skating will be helping each event track that. You don't have to take it right away. If you're not judging till June, maybe you'll take some time and maybe take the exam in May. But, the sooner the better as well. Do current competition judges have to take the quiz? No. I think I mentioned that at the beginning as well. Do we time edge elements to see if they are short versus long? No. Again, we're just doing combinations and shorts, so that we don't use the term long anymore, and that's a tech panel thing. To become a technical specialist or controller referee, do you have to be one already? No. Again, if you go back to the part in the webinar or look in the officials manual under qualifications, as long as you are a novice sectional competition judge or higher, you could serve in either one of those positions. But again, you have to do the webinar on Wednesday, especially for tech specialists and controller referees, and you need to take that quiz as well. Let's keep moving on. Component marking. So components are done in a range of basically 0.25 to 10. And we have some buzzwords for the average, the ranges here. So if it's less than 1, if you're giving someone a 0.25, it's really, really, really bad. I have given a 0.25. It can happen. A 1, so basically 1 to 1.75 is probably very poor. And you can read the rest here. We don't need to go over every buzzword here, but obviously it works itself up to when you get to 9 to 10, it's just outstanding. So let's look at program component scores. So skating skills slash execution, which is 50% of the component score, um, is your first component score. It is defined by overall cleanness and sureness, edge control, and flow of the ice surface, demonstrated by a command of the skating vocabulary, meaning edges, steps, turns, etc. The clarity of technique and the use of effortless power to accelerate and vary speed. So we're looking for things like deep edges, difficult steps. Balance is a great buzzword when we think of skating skills. How great is their balance? We look at knee action, flow and glide, speed, power, all that is super important. That's all part of skating skills. So these are things that we've always evaluated in skating, but now we have a specific place to put this. The next component score is performance and carriage. So we're looking at a number of things here. So the involvement of the skater, and it says pair physically because we do give components to shadow dance. So they're if they're physically and emotionally and intellectually, as they deliver the intent of the music and composition, how involved their physical, emotional, and intellectual involvement and projection. That's the performance part of this score. And then carriage and clarity of movement is also part of this. You can look for a variety of contrasts of movements and energy, individuality, and personality, all as part of performance. And this is 20% of that overall total component score. Interpretation and timing, this one we should all be really familiar with. We just kind of always thought of that second mark in 6.0 as interpretation and timing, but it had to take into consideration more than just interpretation and timing. There was some of performance used to be part of interpretation and timing, or that second mark. So now we're really looking at the personal, creative, and genuine translation of the rhythm, character, and content of the music to movement on ice. So we're looking at movements and steps in time to the music. That's the timing element of this. Expression of the music's character, feeling, and rhythm. If they're skating to it's a true foxtrot piece of music, but all you feel is blues, maybe they're missing the mark a little bit. Maybe they've went the wrong direction. Clearly, if they're skating to a waltz and they're not even skating, to the 3/3 timing of this, you're going to really go down in this component score. We look at the use of finesse to reflect the details and nuances of the music. A great example of that we can talk about that we've already seen was that step sequence, the last step sequence where I had it at a +2. The way she used that music, obviously that's an element, so we're going to go up in our GOE. But we also think of if just the entire program was done that way, that's going to be reflected in this mark significantly. The way she used the timing, she was always in character. You could tell it was a Latin dance, interpreted really accurately. So this is where we would want to reward all of those qualities of that skater in this mark here, which is 30% of the total program component score. Here's another chart for you to look at. Some people are visual, and so the colors help. Other people like the first chart, but this is just another way of looking at it. So again, we see up top we have the 3 different component marks that we'll be putting in, and bullet points to kind of look for. And then we have our range below. So red sort of is like stop, no, this is no good. Orange is it's better, but it's not a go. Green is go. It means it's kind of on the average to above average level of skating. The gold is golden, and then the ultimate is the diamond range. So just like we had adjustments to the GOEs, for instance, if there was an incorrect turn on a twizzle, that's an adjustment. We can't go higher than a 0, right, for one incorrect turn. We also have adjustments to the components as well. So under interpretation of the music and timing, the characteristic timing means skating primarily to the rhythmic beat, program well synchronized with musical phrasing. Um, so in general, this is one of the things that we're looking for under interpretation. I'm not sure why this is a note under adjustments, but this did come out of, it matches the ISU manual. For an actual adjustment, if a fall or an interruption affects the rest of the program or part of the program, certain characteristics of one or several program components may be impacted. So basically, if there's a fall, it takes a really long time for the skater to get up, and they've lost a good portion of the program, we're going to reflect that probably in, well, at least maybe the skating skills execution mark, but it also could have affected the performance, and maybe some of the interpretation was lost, or after the skater got back up, they never really kind of felt the music, and there was a real drop off in the way they skated. So a fall could absolutely affect all three components. So that would be an adjustment. Under skating skills and execution alone, if there's a loss of balance or stumble outside of the required elements, we would take 0.5 per skater, per occurrence, I apologize, per occurrence off of the skating skills component mark. In shadow dance, you would take, if both partners had a loss of balance or stumble, it would be 1 per each, and that means each occurrence, so not each skater. So it would be, it would sort of, if they both went down, you had a big stumble, it would be 0.5 per skater, which is per occurrence for the two of them. So if there was, a real big stumble at the end when they're doing their ending poses or something like that, we would reflect it here. Under interpretation and timing, if they skate out of time or out of phrase with the music, must be penalized. So if they're skating on a weak beat, out of phrase on a pattern dance, you cannot go high in your interpretation component. The timing's completely off. Typically, if somebody is out of phrase 100% for a pattern dance, I don't go higher than a 1.0. So those are some adjustments that you can make to your program components. We're going to look at this free dance and kind of look at the 3 component marks that we're looking for. This is a juvenile skater. I think the skating skills are quite good. There's good edge quality, flow, and speed, so I'm kind of in the 3.75 to 4.5 range for her. Her interpretation is quite good. I think she hits the highlights of the music. She's always on beat. I think it's very clear the rhythm that she's skating in character. So me, this is a 3.5 to a 4.5. Performance. Remember the words that we used: physically, emotionally, and intellectually involved. I think physically she's involved, but emotionally and intellectually, I don't feel that from this skater. The carriage is very good. She's always smiling, but if you'll notice, it's the same expression throughout the entire program, and I think, to me, if I really look at her, I think, does she really, really intellectually understand this piece of music, and is she completely involved, emotionally and intellectually? It's good, but it's not as good as her skating skills and the interpretation. So for me, this would be my lowest mark, even though I still might be, you could go up to a 4. So if I was in my high range, you might see I might be at a 4.5, 4.5, 4. Well, 4 is still a pretty good mark for a juvenile skater, but I'm kind of sending the message to my components that, your skating skills were really, really nice, and I thought your interpretation was good, but you need to work on your performance. So let's watch this and see if you can see what I'm talking about in my comments from above. Already great edges, right to the music. Hits the music, elements really done nicely. Be at a plus for that. Twizzles is the second set. See there, she stopped moving across the ice. So we have an error. We can't go higher than a 0. Everything else was really nice about it. Phrasing was great. But because of the error, we're at a 0. Here's the stop. We actually use that as an example. That it's hard to judge that if she doesn't hold it. So I think you get the feel for this skater's abilities. But if you look, she does kind of facially, she's just there. She's just smiling through it. But does she really understand it? And that's kind of why my performance mark is lower. This is her step sequence. Really nice edge work, and she's using difficult turns. It's clear that it's an ice dancing step sequence. So I would reward for this. Look at the next example. So this is a novice skater, and if you look at my numbers up there, they're actually similar, maybe a little lower than the juvenile skater. So you're going to see that the component marks are going to be used in a wide range of levels. You could have a skater in juvenile easily in a 4, getting a 4 to a 4.5, and you could have a novice skater in the 2s. So we're looking at sort of a it's sort of a universal scale of these. We don't say, well, for juvenile you can only use 1 to 2.5, and for novice we use 2 to 3.5. That's not the way it works. So you can absolutely have a skater in novice who's getting a 6 and another skater who gets a 1. And that's how we truly, really send the signal as to, what they need to work on. For this skater, I thought her interpretation also was very, very good, very similar to the other girl. And for performance, to me, she totally is emotionally and intellectually involved. Carriage is very good, but to me, she gets this. Like, I really get her performance. So for me, her performance is the highest score, unlike the last girl whose performance was the lowest score. So they're very similar, but if you watch her skating skills, she's got some flow and speed, but it lacks real edge quality and it lacks the difficult turns. So for me, that's her weakest mark, even though the program's quite lovely. You see she's really feeling the music and just totally emotionally and intellectually involved right from the beginning. Uses the music well, the phrasing. Like I said, use some nice flow, but not a ton of difficult steps. A lot of crossovers and just simple steps. There's an edge element done beautifully to the music. Beautiful position is the second half of it, so it's a combination edge element. That would be in the pluses for sure. Now that looked like it was going to be a twizzle, but it was just one twizzle, so it's not going to get called. That won't appear on your screen. So we don't give it a GOE. It's just part of the choreography. Here's the twizzles. Really interesting entry. She had that split jump. It was kind of unexpected. We didn't see it coming. So you might go up in your GOE for that. See a hop there. Could have been a nice, deep, difficult turn, but it wasn't. That difficult turn wasn't executed well. Twizzle was okay. So running here, that's not difficult. That's not a clean, difficult turn. Not executed well. It was on flats. Twizzle was fine. So I think you could kind of see where I'm going with this. And to me, even though it's nicely done, I don't see her skating skills as being her strength. I think it really is performance. So that's just sort of an example of how you can see the same components in different levels. And it's okay to use the same component over and over again. in 6.0, you can't really do that because you're going to end up like with a ton of ties and you get boxed in. But in IJS, it's okay to have 4 skaters in one warm-up group with a 3-2-5 for their skating skills if you really thought that that's where they belonged. That's okay. So we'll do another quick question and answer. There's only one right now. It says, does loss of balance include a fall? Outside of an element, that would be the same. Look at your charts, look at your guides. If you have a loss of balance or fall within an element, there's specific deductions for that, and that's in your marking guide for GOEs. Let's move on real quick. So deductions that are voted on by the judges. So what do I mean by voted on? So deductions in ice dance that are decided by the judging panel have to be taken by the majority of the panel, and that includes the controller referee. So if you have 6 people on the panel, let's say you have 5 judges and 1 controller referee, 3 of you taking the deduction and 3 of you not means there is no deduction. But as soon as that 4th person takes the deduction, then it gets taken. So the majority of the panel, 4 out of the 6, if they vote to take a deduction, the deduction will get taken. And that's all just done as part of the software in accounting. So the different deductions that we have the ability to vote on are as follows. First is costume or prop. And this is the same as always. It's the same costume rules. The clothing must not give the effect of excessive nudity, inappropriate for the discipline. The majority, which we call 50% of the upper body, must be covered. This is the torso. So basically from the sternum to the waist, not including the shoulders and arms, front and back, 50% of that must be covered. So if you have an open back, there's literally the entire back is nude, you can't even have a small little tiny diamond cutout in the front of the dress because now you've gone over 50%. So that's how we judge that. And you can read the rest of the rules here, the costume rules. And basically before, when there was a costume violation, we really couldn't show it in 6.0. Now we can actually show it. So if you are using the screen versus paper system, you're going to reflect it. You're going to take the deduction. If the majority of you take it, it will show who took the deduction. And now if it doesn't get taken, nothing shows up in the protocol. So if you think it's a deduction, I strongly suggest that we call it push the button. Push the button, take the deduction. If you're the only one, nobody will know because it doesn't show up so there's no risk in taking it. The second deduction voted on by the judges is music. So for short dance, music must have an audible rhythmic beat, except for the first 10 seconds of the program, you could be without an audible rhythmic beat. What do we mean by audible rhythmic beat? It basically means that any piece of music you can tap your foot to or tap a pencil to that has an audible rhythmic beat. It doesn't have to come from percussion. It can come from any instrument. It could come from the voice. If it was a cappella but clearly done with a pace, the voice alone could actually provide you with that beat. So listen to all of the instrumentation, but basically, if you're just sitting there and you find yourself, your head's nodding and your foot's tapping, you got a beat. But if you seriously just cannot find something to tap your foot to, then you don't have an audible beat. And then the music in short dance has to be selected in accordance with the designated rhythms. That is posted under the requirements every year. So you'll look, and this year it's Latin, and it'll tell you all the different Latin types of music that they can use. If the short dance music did not adhere to these 2 specifications, the panel will vote to take a music deduction. Music deductions are 2 points. It's applied to the final score. So again, this is the controller referee is part of the voting, but if the tempo for pattern dance or the pattern dance element in a short dance is incorrect. That's strictly the controller referee. So they're looking for beats per minute when they're doing pattern dance, and then also when they're doing the pattern dance element in the short dance. They're going to time it with their stopwatch. Judges don't have to worry about that. Do not think twice about the beats per minute unless it's so slow it's just clearly obvious. Then you would reflect it actually in your interpretation and timing component. It would not be a deduction. It would be a deduction from the controller referee only. Music in free dance. So there's little different rule free dance versus short dance. In short dance, we have the required rhythms. In free dance, the second piece, because the first is the same audible rhythmic beat with 10 seconds allowed to be missing at the beginning. But the second aspect of this is the music must be suitable for the skater's skating skills and technical ability. And what this basically means, if you have a little juvenile skater coming out skating to something like, Bolero and just can't even come close to pulling it off because it's just too big of a piece of music and it's just too mature and they just don't, we really don't want to see that. So we take the music deduction so that we send the message that this is not the right kind of music for this level of skater or potentially this age. Sometimes it's inappropriate music. You might have vocals and you hear, it's a little girl and we've literally had at nationals one year in juvenile dance, we had a couple skating to stripper music, and a bunch of us took the deduction. So that's an example of where you could take that deduction. And then these rules come from the test rules. I think these are going to be expanded next year a little bit to follow couples, but right now we're just mirroring the test rules for solo dance. So at the bottom you'll see we say a program that displays a change in tempo and a well-balanced use of melody, rhythmic beat, and musical accents, and not melody alone, is considered to be of a higher quality because it shows a greater variety of dancing skills. So we don't require the variety, but we should reward it. Next year, we'll probably require it in the same way we require it for couples. So that will be coming down the pike. Then the last deduction that's voted on by the judges are choreographic restrictions. This is going to be a new concept for sure. There are things that you cannot do, but they're not something the technical panel is looking for. So it's up to the judges to take the deduction. So the first thing we look for in both short and free dance is, do they touch the ice with their hands on purpose? So not the result of a fall or touch, they stumble and get to catch themselves with their hands. But if it's clearly on purpose that they meant to, touch the ice, that's just not allowed. So we take a choreographic restriction deduction. And then also stops for more than 6 seconds in the free dance, as I discussed earlier under stops. In short dance only, having more than the permitted number of stops. So there's only 2 stops allowed each year. Pay attention to your stop rules in short dance because they can change from year to year depending on the rhythm. But if they only allow 2 stops and there's a third one, that's a choreographic restriction. But that would just be in short dance because, as we know, in free dance you can have as many stops as you want. And then in short dance, the other thing that's a little tricky are pattern violations. So pattern violations would be things like crossing the midline and not skating in the general directions. It's important to get familiar with those rules in short dance. Go back, pull out your rule book, look at the manual, and see what the rules are for pattern in short dance. And I strongly suggest, if the controller referee during their pre-event meeting doesn't bring this up, ask them to discuss it, because this should always be a discussion point prior to every short dance event, because it is tricky, and it's tricky for people who've been doing it for years. And then at the bottom here again, controller referees should schedule a pre-event meeting to ensure judges understand the short dance pattern requirements. It's right there. So here's the process for taking the deductions. If you have a screen, you're going to see DED, but there's a possibility that there isn't a deduction button. There's going to be some other button you need. If you don't see a DED, ask an accountant, ask a ref, show me where the deduction button is. Because you're going to need to push this button and a whole new screen will open up. And you're going to see options, music, choreographic restriction, costume, prop, and you're going to press that box. So if it's a costume deduction, hit the costume button. After you hit that button, you're going to see the number pop up. So it could be number -1 for costume, or choreographic restriction, -2 for music. You have to hit the number. I don't know why. It's kind of redundant, but right now that's just the way the software works. So hit the type of deduction, hit the number of the deduction to confirm it, and then you're going to hit exit to go back to the main screen. If you're using the paper system, at the bottom of the sheet, again, you're going to see one box for each one of those deductions. All you do is just vote by putting a big X in the box. So it's really super easy with paper. Final question and answer. Who is next week's webinar for? It's for Tech Panel. Anyone could sit in and listen to it. That's fine. If you are new to IJS, I'm not sure I would recommend it. You don't want to get overwhelmed with information. If you are qualified to serve as a controller referee or technical specialist, you will be required to watch the webinar and take the quiz. Is there a data webinar? There will not be a data webinar. I think that the screens are going to look very similar. I've been told by a number of people who do data that it will be a pretty easy transition. If there is anything tricky, I do know that there's a couple people who said they would probably write up like a little explanation or do like a little sheet and you know, highlight the things that are important to look for as a data person. Are deductions taken without consultation? Yes, you do not want to discuss it. So if you're all sitting there watching a warm-up and there's a costume that looks really iffy for you, please keep to yourself. If you think it's a deduction, take it, but it's really not appropriate to lean over to the next judge and go, so what do you think of that pink dress? So no, we all take it anonymously, and the majority of us take it. It gets a deduction. Will judges be notified if an element is too long or too short? No, because if it's something that the tech panel is timing, they'll handle it. If it's a dance stop, you're responsible for that. No one's going to tell you about it. You're on your own. Will codes be in the manual for specific solo elements? The codes right now reside in the skaters and coaches manual, but I think we're preparing a separate document that we'll have on that solo dance page. So you just see a link, it might say solo dance codes. You can just click on that and everything will be right there. So you can familiarize yourself. It's pretty intuitive. So edge element is EE. You know, solo twizzles are SO, you know, STW. So that it kind of makes sense. You'll be able to get familiar with it pretty quickly. Is the referee on the tech panel, and do they need the other webinar? Yes and yes. So there's a controller referee. So you're doing referee duties, but also serving as the controller. So you're helping the specialist, and you will need the training and the quiz. Will we see updates posted like when we see technical notifications come out on the website? When you go to the solo series page, again, under programs, solo series, and all the reference materials are there, there will be a little area that says what has been updated and what the update is. So there is a way to track changes. And again, there probably will be changes and clarifications throughout the year. I think not so many changes, but more like clarifications. So it's important to check back through the season maybe and see what's been updated on there. Um, so that's it for questions. I think I just want to leave you with, just kind of a words of encouragement. Don't get discouraged if you find, you look at your protocol and your component marks are 2 points higher than everyone else. It's okay. We've all been there in 6.0 where everyone else was, in the threes and we might have been in the fives. I mean, it happens. Um, it's going to take a while for you to get a feel for what your range is, where so your components I think will take longer to get comfortable with, and it's okay to have a range of marks on these sheets. So don't get too worked up about it. And again, talk about it. I think that's the most helpful way to learn the IJS system, is just to start asking questions and talk with your fellow panel members. And I think that's it for this. Good luck on the quiz. It's super easy. It's only 20 questions. You can take it as many times as you want. It's really, the purpose of the quiz is just to familiarize yourself where the information is. How do you find it? And what resources are going to be most helpful for you when you're on the panel. Good luck this year. Have a great time, and certainly feel free to reach out to me with specific questions if you need. My email is millierjc@aol.com, millierjc@aol.com. Take care. Thanks for watching.